Welcome, everybody, to our third, final, and in many ways nearest and dearest to our hearts and most important plenary. The number one issue in my state and in your states, it's got to be number one or number two at best, is the high cost of housing. And it's a challenge people face. Of course, there's a national dimension with mortgage interest rates, inflation rates. That's not under our control as governors. We can certainly seek to influence fiscal responsibility at the national level. But there also are pieces directly under our purview about what we can do to reduce the cost of housing in our state. In fact, it's so much on our minds that when governors get together, no matter what the scheduled topic is, it seems like we end up talking about housing. One could even say that housing is our Roman Empire. That was a meme. We talk about it at least several times a day. We decided that this time we wanted to dedicate a special time to talk about housing. As I travel around our state, it's a top issue. You know, our states, we do such a great job making sure they're a great place to live, to raise a family, to start a business. And when we're successful, in effect, it sometimes makes it harder to afford to live in our great states. And we all know the stories in our states. It's, you know, parents whose 27-year-old kids still live in their basement with no prospect of moving out. It's people who want to be able to take a good job but have to have an hour commute each way to be able to afford to live. It's the people that are the backbone of our community, and law enforcement and teachers and firefighters not being able to afford to live in the communities that they serve in. Businesses that can't recruit the talent they need to power their growth. We are really focused on making progress in Colorado. Last year, I was able to sign a bill that banned growth caps. We had several municipalities that had basically passed policies saying, sorry, zero new housing. We said that doesn't work. And now we are moving forward very aggressively to increase the supply of housing, with more housing now, looking at additional multifamily housing in transit-oriented communities, accessory dwelling units by right. We're tackling liability costs from multifamily condo construction, easing government mandates like parking requirements. And I'm very excited to hear what other governors are doing, because this is a challenge that we all face. We have a national expert on this with us, somebody who is deeply involved with this fight from a policy perspective, working with the NGOs in this space across our country, who will help give us an overview of national housing trends. Charlie Anderson is the Executive Vice President for Infrastructure at Arnold Ventures. Before he joined Arnold Ventures, which has been a great partner to us, and I know so many other governors, he served as a special assistant to the President for Economic Policy at the White House Economic Council. He led their work on permitting and environmental review, which is a great backdrop for the current role, because a lot of what we're talking about here is reducing red tape, bureaucracy, costs in time and treasure to be able to build the housing stock that we know we need. Now he is focused on solutions to help America build faster, better, and at a lower cost. I think that's something that we can all celebrate. And with that, I welcome Charlie Anderson to join me on the stage. Welcome, Charlie. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, you really, when you said those are very sweet notes for governors. When you say that we want to build things faster, better, and at lower cost, you really had us. So I think we're already warmed up to you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the trends that are occurring and your advice to us as governors, and then we'll get to what some of our governors are doing.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, thanks for having me. As the governor said, I work on infrastructure, and I'm at Arnold Ventures, which is a philanthropy, and we're focused on nonpartisan, evidence-based solutions that address America's most challenging problems. And on the infrastructure team, that means that we fund research, policy development, and advocacy to, as the governor said, build faster, better, and lower cost in the United States. So it's all domestic. And that means transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and of course, housing, which is why we're here today. And I'll just say it's a really important moment, and you can see by the attendance here that folks are hearing about this all over the country. And so I really appreciate the bipartisan support for this issue from governors everywhere. You know, a decade ago, acute housing costs were really concentrated in sort of those coastal land-constrained cities, places like San Francisco, New York City. But it's spread, and housing affordability is an issue all over the country for people at most income levels, whether urban, suburban, rural, whether workforce or seniors. Everyone is struggling in some way with the affordability of housing. And the evidence is really strong here. More restrictive zoning and regulations leads to fewer homes. That housing shortage leads to higher prices. And now we're millions of homes short of where we need to be based on population growth to keep up after decades of underbuilding. And that underbuilding means that half of renters right now pay more than 30% of their income on the rent each month. And that's 22 million households. And even worse, you have 12 million of those households who pay half their income on the rent each month. Home ownership also increasingly out of reach. Every single state has seen house prices go up at least 25% since early 2020. Some have seen it rise as much as 60% in just 4 years. Young families are buying homes 6 years later than they used to. Used to be 29, now it's 35. Some aren't even making that purchase at all. Families who own already and want to move are stuck because there isn't enough inventory. Seniors are unable to afford places to independently live out their golden years, and that's why you see AARP getting engaged in this fight too. So basic story, cost burdens are challenging all kinds of people in all kinds of places. So what do we do about it? What works? If you look at places like Houston that are less restrictive, they've built many more homes than similar cities and have much lower prices. Minneapolis is an example of a city that made it easier to build apartments. They've seen a ton of apartments built, and real rents have declined even as they've risen in comparable cities. So fewer restrictions equals more homes and lower costs. But Houston and Minneapolis are rare cases. Most cities and towns get stuck, either too afraid of a minority of loud anti-housing voices that frequent city hearings, or just hoping a new far-flung exurb pops up to house workers who can't afford to live there. And you know, in either case, states have an obligation to step up, and we're seeing a lot of states do that, many of you around this table. There's a well-established policy menu. You mentioned many of these things. You know, by enabling more people to afford to live in your state, it grows your economy, supports strong labor markets and innovation, funds services without having to raise tax rates. This is about ending unnecessary regulatory burdens that make housing more costly, reducing constraints on people's property rights, expanding the supply of starter homes and opportunities for home ownership. To paraphrase Governor Cox, this is all about ensuring our kids have an opportunity to live near us rather than with us when they grow up. You know, there's no silver bullet here. Governor Polis mentioned a lot of the things on the policy menu: cutting permitting times and regulatory red tape, legalizing granny flats, also known as accessory dwelling units or ADUs, allowing missing middle housing like quadplexes and cottagecore to return to places where they've been banned. This was traditionally allowed and only in recent decades was not. Allowing apartments in commercial districts and near transit, eliminating unnecessary parking requirements that increase the cost of building, creating more opportunities for starter homes by reducing minimum lot sizes. Could go on and on, but basically these are really popular things across the aisle. You know, as you've seen in your state, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they want people to address this supply challenge. So, you know, and I think alongside these reforms, we need subsidies for deeply affordable housing, but subsidies alone aren't going to solve the problem. 90% of housing built is market rate. And if you're not solving that build challenge, you're going to push down on the people who need those deeply affordable units to be subsidized. I think Governor Gianforte has shown that, you know, when a governor leads on this issue, you identify it as a core challenge, you show urgency and come up with real solutions, you build a big table with a broad cross-section of people, you can get big things done. And that's how he got what's being called the Montana Miracle done last year, and that's why so many folks are eager to hear from him, and I'm sure we will. And that's why I'm excited that Governor Polis, you and so many others are stepping up to lead this year and into the future. So with that, turn it back to you, and happy to take it from here.
Thank you, and I want to go to Governor Gianforte to tell us and share with his fellow governors what he got done, but even more importantly, how he got it done. Governor Gianforte.
Yeah, thank you, Jared, and thank you for your work, Charlie. We looked at this problem in Montana, and maybe it was because of the show Yellowstone and the pandemic that everybody decided they wanted to move to the most beautiful state, and they did.
You know, the thing is, all of our states are the most beautiful in our own minds, so that's the only problem with that in this crowd.
I'm going to be careful, Greg, not to point out that the first 2 seasons of Yellowstone were filmed in Utah, but it's fine.
And it's all about a park that's in Wyoming, just saying.
Did you mention the train station is in Wyoming? So we recognized, moving on, that this is the #1 issue facing working families. And it was particularly acute because people were moving into our communities and there just wasn't enough supply. We recognized it primarily as a supply problem. So what we did, we have the incredible blessing that our legislature only meets for 90 days every 2 years. So we had a very tight window. So in August, prior to that legislative session, I formed a task force, the Governor's Task Force on Housing, and it was a really broad section, bipartisan people, folks from the building industry, realtors, county commissioners, city officials, state officials, nonprofit leaders from places like Habitat for Humanity. We got everybody at the table. And I gave them a charge to cast a really broad net. And then we went in, that was in August, we had the reports by October. We went into the legislative session in January and we essentially ran the table. And we've seen great results. In 1 year, we've seen average rental prices come down 20% in our largest communities. Average vacancy rates for apartments have gone from just over 1%, which is not a healthy market, it's too tight, to over 6% in those same markets, so people have choices. So what did we actually do? Let me just hit a few things quickly. The first thing we did was we passed comprehensive land use planning reform, call it master planning. So a community can adopt a master growth plan. They can come together and decide how they want their community to grow. It gets vetted through a public process. Everyone's voice gets heard. But then when a builder comes in seeking a building permit, if it matches the growth plan, there's no public hearings, they just get their permit. That speeds up the permitting process. The second thing we realized, particularly for states that are seeing growth, there were no water and sewer infrastructure programs for new development. They all focused on urban development, replacing aging water and sewer. So out of our surplus, we put over $100 million into the HOMES program, which is a low-interest revolving loan fund for municipalities so they can put in water and sewer. But we put an extra requirement on it that any subdivision to qualify for this low-interest loan program has to be at least 10 units per acre. So it's oriented towards workforce. We authorized ADUs statewide in any community that allows single-family homes. You can have an ADU. We allowed on a statewide basis, we authorized apartments in commercial areas, so you could have retail and then upstairs apartments. We ended exclusionary zoning, which essentially, if you require big lots with big houses, they're going to be more expensive. If you allow more density, that's better. We changed the way we do local design review boards. A lot of these are very capricious. They like certain species of tree. They like certain colors of siding. They like other things based on the personalities of the individuals on these own local design boards. We said they're going to be staffed no longer with volunteers. They have to be staffed with professionals that work for the local municipality, and any requirements they place on a builder have to be related to public safety. So you can require a sidewalk, but you can't tell them what kind of trees to plant. And then finally, recognizing that it's a supply problem, we also worked extensively in increasing the number of people in the trades. We created a tax credit scholarship that'll pay up to $3,000 per year per employee to anyone that'll send somebody to trade school. And this goes through the local employer, so it's only going to get spent on jobs that are in demand. We changed our apprenticeship ratios, essentially quadrupling the number of apprenticeships in the state. And as I mentioned, we've gotten good results. And I think Jared, you and I have had this conversation. How'd you get that done? And my advice is that every time I got pushback from the left or the right in our legislature, I would say, do we want our nurses, teachers, and police officers to live in the community where they work? And will this measure allow that to happen? And in the end, that common sense logic won the day.
It's great. A great success story, and one that many of us are looking to implement parts of, and appreciate your thoughts on the tactics as well. Governor Kotek, talk a little bit about what's happening both in Oregon as well as the city of Portland, obviously one of the sort of ground central for affordability, but also many other areas of your state.
Thank you, Governor Polis, and just very excited to hear about what's going on in Montana. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of the same themes that we're dealing with in Oregon. I just want to start off by saying I'm glad we're having this plenary on housing. It is the most bipartisan issue facing all of our states right now. End of story. We all need to figure this out, and I think governors have to lead the way. And it's not an Oregon problem, as we've said, it's a national problem. Suburban, urban, rural, we all have these issues. I spent the last year, my first year in office, visiting every county in Oregon, 36 of them, 4.5 million people, big state, issue in every place. It's not just lower income, it is workforce housing, it is all types of housing. Our communities don't have what they need. Decades of underbuilding in Oregon, for all kinds of reasons why we've underbuilt, but they've driven up the rents, the home prices, and the most stark reminder of our housing supply challenge in Oregon is our high levels of unsheltered homelessness that we are addressing. Oregon needs to produce over 440,000 housing units in the next 20 years to keep pace with the demand, as well as make up for the lack of supply. I set a new standard last year with an emergency order saying we're going to build 36,000 units per year for the next decade. That would double our production. So we have a lot of work to do. And we can't just focus on folks who are unsheltered. We are doing that too, because that is the immediate crisis in Oregon, and you see it in our major city, particularly in Portland. But the biggest challenge we have had in serving folks who are living on the streets is we know how to build more shelter, and we're doing it. We know how to keep people from becoming homeless by helping them with rent. But when someone has experienced homelessness and we move them into shelter and we try to get them stable, we are having a hard time rehousing because we literally don't have enough units. I've been working on this for probably the last 6 years. We've done everything from authorizing statewide missing middle in communities of a certain size, all have adopted plans to now allow townhomes, cottage clusters, duplexes in the communities where they have traditionally only built single families. We've legalized ADUs. We have established for the first time, and as you know, Oregon has a huge planning system in our land use system to fight sprawl and protect our forests and farms. But we haven't done a good job of actually saying what we need. So we will now have, under a couple pieces of legislation, regional and local housing needs analyses of what is available, what needs to be built. If we don't know where we're going, we're not going to solve the problem. And one of the things I did last year under another emergency order was establish a housing production advisory council, similar to, I think, what you were doing in Montana. 20 plus individuals, housing producers, engineers, local government leaders, people who finance housing, all coming down and being like, what do we need to do? Well, they gave me a report of 59 recommendations. We're still going through those. But it's everywhere from financing to construction, workforce, to model codes and permitting and land use supply, all the things that we know are issues in our state and probably in yours as well. So with some of those recommendations, I have one bill in our current legislative session. It's our housing production bill. I've asked for $500 million in one-time dollars to do a number of things. The two biggest ticket items that we're negotiating right now is money for infrastructure. If you're going to build housing, we're hearing you don't have water, you don't have sewer. We're all dealing with that, so we have to put some money in there. We also need more financial incentives for workforce housing. It's the role, I think, of the state to really be involved, and we have been in deeply subsidized housing, but we are hearing from our private developers that they just need extra help to get more workforce housing put into the pipeline. We're establishing for the first time a housing accountability and production office at the state level that will provide technical assistance to our communities in terms of grants and TA. It will provide model codes and other things to simplify at the local level where we know most of this takes place to get more production in the pipeline. And we're dealing with land supply. For those of you who know Oregon, we have 50 years of a fabulous land use system that has gone a little creaky when it comes to housing. So we have said, some cities, if you can show a need for land and affordability, you should have a one-time expansion tool in your urban growth boundary to build more housing, and 30% of that new development would have to be affordable. So my hope is the legislature passes that, and we really have a jump start on what we need to do. The bottom line for me is, when people say, what do you have to do? You have to do all of it. All of it. Particularly in our state where we're so short on supply, we're going to have to really push hard. And so I look forward to working with my legislators to get that done. So I haven't asked for all of you today, because it would not be a great meeting if we didn't actually challenge ourselves to do something. There's a tax bill in front of Congress right now that would be helpful. And I want to thank the Western Governors Association for talking about some of the issues that are in the tax bill today. Greater flexibility for public activity bonds in our states. We've maxed out our threshold on public activity bonds because we've been almost putting exclusively all of that ability into our affordable housing, so we need more ability there. And we all know LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit, is really important for penciling out affordable and workforce housing. We need more on LIHTC. So right now, the Tax Relief for American Workers and Families Act, I don't know who wrote that one, the tax relief bill that's in Congress deals with strengthening LIHTC, gives us more threshold on private activity bonds. Like I said, WGA has also already said that that is what we need to be doing right now. It passed the House 357 to 70. There might be some things in there that's causing a little drama, but I can tell you if we could get that tax bill passed, those things are going to be really huge for all of our states. So if you haven't talked to your folks, talk to your senators. We need to pass that tax relief bill so we can get LIHTC increased as well as getting more on public activity bonds. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor Kotek. And I think in terms of our advocacy role, I think anything that reduces financing costs, which is one of the key drivers of cost, would be good, and that would include, fiscal responsibility. It would include monetary policy. It would include tax credits, as Governor Kotek mentioned. But these kinds of policies federally that would create an environment with lower interest rates and/or specifically targeted lower financing costs around housing would be helpful. Governor Cox?
Thank you, Governor Polis, and thank you so much, Charlie, for taking time to be here with us. I want to thank my fellow governors for inspiring me as well. Greg in Montana, thank you. We've copied a lot of what you're doing. This is the benefit, I think, of the National Governors Association. We should be stealing ideas from each other and things that work. And so I'm going to change my remarks just a little bit because I'm going to take a little bit different approach if I could and share something with you that you probably haven't heard yet. And I really hope it passes my legislature next week or I'm going to be very embarrassed. So we'll see what happens here. But so I had an epiphany a few months ago that is very different. We have been doing a lot of the things that everybody else is doing. And some of it's working for sure. What would happen, though, is we would take all these ideas to the legislature, and by the time I got something through, and we got things through, they were always a little bit watered down. Our League of Cities and Towns.
None of us have ever experienced that, Spencer.
I know it doesn't happen there, but my local municipalities were really good at kind of watering some of these things down, and I get it. I'm a former mayor. We don't like the state coming in and telling us what to do, so it was a struggle, and we've taken a shotgun approach. We have to do everything, right? You just said that, Governor Kotek. So the epiphany was this. I needed to change my messaging. I needed something that the people, to cut through the NIMBYism, I needed something that would resonate with the people. I needed to get to the simplicity on the far side of complexity. And what I realized was this. We're doing all of those things. We're doing density, we're building more apartment buildings, we're doing all of this stuff. But the one thing that we were not building anymore we stopped building about 15 years ago in almost all of our states are single-family, detached, owner-occupied starter homes. I'm talking about homes that are 1,000 square feet to 1,400 square feet, right? How many of you grew up in a home like that or started your families in a home like that? Almost all of us, okay? So we just stopped building those in Utah, and I think in most places in the country. And what I found was the starter home, that idea of a starter home, the American dream, home ownership, was something that resonated with everyone and cut through the clutter and could get us past the NIMBYism. Now, most people didn't want a big apartment building in their backyard, but their heart went out to this idea that someone could own a home for the first time. Our school teachers, our firefighters. So we took that concept, we went to our economists, and they came back and said, we need to build 35,000 starter homes in Utah. We need all the other stuff too, okay? So I'm not saying we don't need that. We need 35,000 starter homes in Utah in the next 5 years. And that became my message, my mandate. That is all I talk about. We call them Utah First Homes. That resonates with people. It's something they can believe in and buy in. So then I go to the legislature, and I have all these ideas. And it turns out we don't have the budget we thought we were going to have this year. We still have a surplus in Utah, but not nearly as much as we thought we were going to have to be able to do this. So we started diving in with all of the builders and developers in our state, finding out, why are you not building these homes anymore? And there were lots of different reasons. But if you look at your states right now, and I was surprised to see this, our building starts are going down right now. Part of that is because of interest rates for sure, but there are other reasons. And what we found out, there were a couple things. One, again, because municipalities weren't offering smaller lots, the incentive is to build the biggest thing you can every time, right? So we have to change that. But the other thing that I did not see coming is because of the bank failures that happened a year ago or however long ago that was, almost exactly a year ago, the FDIC pulled back and is limiting the amount of money that banks can lend, okay? And so many banks, many of our developers have projects on the books, but could not get construction loans for those projects. Or if they could get construction loans, they were getting them at interest rates that were so high, 10 to 15%, that they struggled to pencil it out. And if you're getting loans at that high, you're not gonna build starter homes, inexpensive homes. By the way, median home price in Utah now is approaching $500,000. You have to make $170,000 to buy a median home in Utah right now. 75% of Utahns could, if they didn't own a home now, could not afford to own a home right now. That's unsustainable. So here's what we did, and I'll try to get through this really quickly. This is the idea that just came out that I don't think anybody else is doing. I needed a lot of money, right? And so we have a treasurer's fund, our public treasurers, we call it the PTIF fund. This is where you invest all of the money in your state until it gets spent, right? It's like the savings account for your state. Your municipalities may participate in that as well. Right now for us, it gets invested in short-term, commercial paper, mutual funds, those types of things, securities, really secure things. We get about a 5% return on that every year, and it's kind of a liquid fund. So I said, wait a minute, we're investing in China, we're investing in New York, we're investing in California, that money, our savings account, but it's not being invested in Utah. What if we took some of that? What if we took, right now we're looking at $350 million, but we could go up to maybe $1 billion of that, and started investing it in short-term construction loans for our developers to build starter homes, all right? So the bill has $350 million in it with a 3.5% return that will be mixed with, it has to be mixed with the financial institution. So the banks will lend this out. They'll mix our money with their money. They'll lend it out again, for a year for the construction loan, okay? At 3.5%, the developers, they have to build 60% of the project has to be homes under $350,000, starter homes, okay? Small lots. Now you're wondering, the cities will never go for this, right? Well, the cities will go for it, and here's why. We're creating a new zone, a first home, a starter home zone in Utah. They have to provide smaller lots. That's part of it. They have to do that. But what they get in return that they're very excited about, they get access to some infrastructure funding that we're giving them. They also, these are deed restricted lots. which means that there are no secondary rentals. They have to be single-family, detached, owner-occupied. So that means the big institutional investors can't buy them up and rent them out. They can't be used as secondary rentals on the market. Our cities are really excited about that. And again, it gives them a place for their firefighters and their police officers and their teachers to live, and for our kids and grandkids. So we will have an opportunity to really juice the supply side of this. And we have builders lined up. They said, look, if you can get us money at 3.5%, we will go build all of the starter homes you want right now. So I really hope this is going to work. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work in a big way, and we're excited to share more details of that with you.
We're gonna watch that, Spencer, and let me throw one more, because we're all and Governor Kotek mentioned financing as well, and I think we're all generally frustrated around financing because it's not directly in our purview. But that's a great approach. One more to throw out. Some of you might be familiar with PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, form of sort of increment financing on the property assessment. We're also looking at that for accessory dwelling unit construction. So basically, you take it out as a senior lien on the property assessment at a much lower interest rate than a commercial mortgage would be. It goes with the property, obviously, if you sell in the future. But at the micro level, we're hoping that we can implement that as a lower cost financing. Phil understands this stuff inside and out. You can explain it all to us, Phil. I want to go to Governor Green, but let me go to Charlie first to kind of comment on what he's hearing. And I think this is a great exchange of ideas.
I mean, my basic takeaway is, isn't this exciting, right? I mean, there's just so many of you taking this menu, as I said, and catering it to your states in different ways that meet the needs of each of your people. I mean, this is, you know, sometimes it's hard to be hopeful about where our country's going right now, but this is like bipartisan work to solve a problem that is profound in people's lives in so many ways. I mean, this is stuff that we will all be proud of, you know, generations from now. So thank you for that. I just to pick up on a few themes, as Governor Cox says, it's always hard the first time. You go in and you push on this and people scream and they have all kinds of reasons. But I think what we see is that over time, you elevate the issue. It resonates with people, everybody's feeling it, and you go back at it in different ways. You pick up pieces and you try. And even Governor Gianforte, who had such success last year, is going back at it again because there's no silver bullets here. You're not going to solve it in one fell swoop. So that's exciting. I think as Governor Kotek said, you need the financing tools, you need the affordability tools alongside the supply, but you can't do one or the other, you got to do both. And if you don't deal with the supply issues, it's going to push down on the most vulnerable people, and that's why you see the places with the lowest vacancy rates, the places with the highest home prices are the ones with unsheltered homeless populations that are really struggling, or people who are getting evicted. And so those two things relate to each other, and I hope that conversation between people who care about so-called capital A affordable housing or homelessness services or just treating people with dignity are also thinking about these supply issues that are pushing more people into housing instability. And I think, as Governor Gianforte said, looking at vacancy rates is a good test of what a healthy housing market looks like. And when the vacancy rate is higher, the tenant, gets a little bit more of a second chance, and especially people who are coming from, environments where maybe they're coming out of incarceration, maybe they've had other struggles. Making sure they have a place to go is highly dependent on what are the vacancy rates. But that's also true for workforce. That's all. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up and let you all talk because you're so much more interesting than me, is there's this connection where people see a lot of new homes being built and they say, oh, that's all luxury housing. But what people don't realize is that any new unit that is built, somebody's moving into that and they're moving from somewhere else. And if you look at the chain of moves, very quickly, Class C, more affordable units become more affordable than they were before, and somebody's moving into that unit too. And so that's kind of the connection between the supply challenge and workforce and up and down the income spectrum. So I'll stop there.
They say Hawaii is hell on earth and no one wants to live there. So Governor Green, what do you do with a problem like that?
Now that I know that we're the second most beautiful state to Montana, it's more challenging. A couple observations, and really a great thanks to all of our colleagues and our expert about the observations. They're absolutely what we're seeing also. But our median cost is now $1.1 million in Hawaii and the islands, and we have shortages of precisely the nurses, teachers, and firefighters, and we're making that case. A couple things have happened since we last were together. First of all, we did, of course, recognize housing as our greatest challenge, just like seemingly every other state. So we're right there with you. And we went into emergency rules immediately, like a really good, solid red state, okay? We did emergency rules on homelessness and housing, and people were shocked. They said, what are we doing here? And we had a war that broke out. But to try to pull back every possible bit of red tape and restriction that we had been instructed over the many years with lots of really thoughtful studies, actually. So we did that, and it became so controversial and conflict-driven that our developers, who loved every single thing and helped us build these emergency proclamations, were too afraid of using them for fear of litigation. So then we had to compromise, and then kind of come back down to earth. So there was that. Then what happened was on August 8th, the fire occurred. And the fire on Maui displaced 3,000 households in a market that was already beyond tight. I mean, you can't rent anything for less than $5,000 or $6,000 a month already on Maui, and it threw everything into chaos. So what did we learn? Well, we already feel like we know we have to do all of these different pieces to build housing. But when we pulled back the curtain, we then found out, okay, where are you going to house people now that they've been displaced? The only option we had, as our FEMA friends will tell us, and everyone's been hearing in the Washington Post, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal, is long-term rentals. We have to find long-term rentals. We pulled back that curtain and we found out what the real deal was in our state. On Maui alone, there were 31,000 short-term rentals. 31,000. There's only 150,000 people live there. And in our state, we have 89,000 short-term rentals, of which a total for the whole state, 89,000 short-term rentals, only 15,000 are legal. So we have 74,000, quote, illegal or unsanctioned, unlicensed short-term rentals. I have 50,000 units, I'm 50,000 units short statewide to probably kind of be able to house everybody. And I have these 89,000 short-term rentals because it is so appealing to come and short-term rent in Hawaii. I want to unpack this a little bit because we're going to have to work on this. This is one of our huge pieces of solution, why I'm mentioning it now. For us, a short-term rental brings in 400% return as compared to regular rentals. So if a house is being rented at $4,000 a month to one of our nurses, a short-term rental owner, God bless them, will bring in $16,000. So how do you compete with that? Some stats, 52% of all of Hawaii's short-term rentals are owned by mainland guys. And 27% of all of our short-term rental owners own 20 units or more, so institutional owners. So that's where we are. If I could tomorrow put 40 or 50,000 of these units back with a nice runway, with some tax breaks, I really wouldn't have a housing crisis. But on Maui, we tried everything. Amazingly, the council passed a bill to give people 18 months to 2 years of complete property tax amnesty, no property tax, if they would convert to a long-term rental to house two people who've been displaced by a fire. They killed people. And only 15% of the people would even take that up as an opportunity. And we're paying the full boat, their fair market value of what they earned as short-term rental, business people. So it's that difficult to convert that without maybe bringing down some pretty terrible, we described it as like a nuclear hammer. And we don't want to just like disrupt people's business lives, but we now are out of balance. We have a fundamental imbalance. And that was what I was thinking as all of you were sharing your stories. I think there is a fundamental imbalance in America, and we're going to have to bring it back in some way, whether it's short-term rentals or affordable loans or projects that we actually use some of our public dollars for. One idea has also come up, which is our bankers have told us, if we set aside about 5% the value of a large project, like say a $2 billion project, if we can guarantee 5% in an account in a special fund in our state coffers, they can begin to loan way below to people, because no one will go AWOL on a 3% loan when regular rates are 7%. So that's another thing that has emerged as an idea. So I wanted to just share that scenario with you, and then talk very, very briefly about homelessness for us. We have a high homeless rate, as you know. We are poised, and you'll hopefully ask me in a couple years whether we did it or not, we're poised to drop unsheltered homelessness by half over 4 years, even after having had a very high number. And the way we're doing it is we are using the resources we have, including healthcare resources, to build small villages and let people go in at really low cost. The villages' houses are $16,000 on average cost, as opposed to, you know, $400,000 or $500,000 to build a kind of regular home. And we're taking very high utilizing and suffering individuals and giving them, even sometimes at tiny rent or no rent, the space to go and get better, and their costs are dropping at over 70% per person, which will free up Medicaid dollars, which gives us the capacity to invest in some of these other excellent ideas. And right now, as we know, HHS has let 8 of our states begin to do that. So it's a lot to share, but I just wanted to say, I think there are some other imbalances in society that we're gonna have to address if we have any hope of not having the same problem 2, 3, and 4 years out.
I want to turn to a moment to Governor.
Jared,
Yes.
sorry, right here.
Yes,
can I
Governor
just
Cox,
ask,
yes.
Has anybody kind of figured out the short-term rental thing? Is anybody doing anything in that space?
We know New York, right? New York took pretty bold action, and they passed a bill where you have to be on site to have a short-term rental. Now, it's pretty aggressive, okay? But it did drop, I understand, from my, the lectures I've received and updates by over 80%. So that's a lightning bolt that hits a market. And I can't say whether it's good or bad. We'd have to ask Kathy. But we're about to do some similar things to return some housing back to the market.
And I think Charlie wants to get in on short-term rentals. We certainly don't know the answer in Colorado either, Spencer. I want to hear, and I want Governor Murphy to get ready. He's our resident banker, so I want to hear your thoughts on financing. And Governor Cox's idea, the one I mentioned on a pace increment, Governor Kotek, what should we advocate for federally? I mean, it's hard to talk about housing without, and ignore the fact that you have to borrow to build. And so would love your insights on that, on short-term rentals and whatever else you want to address. Charlie.
Yeah, I was just going to say on short-term rentals, whatever you think of the right answer, New York City's vacancy rate is 1.4% right now, right? They still have a huge supply problem. There's many other tools they need to bring to bear, and I know the mayor's trying to do that, as well as groups like Open New York. The governor made a push on that as well. The only other point I'll make is a lot of folks have talked about financing tools. 2 things. One, Governor Cox mentioned that because of sort of the banking system issues, some of the regulators have asked for more equity to be used to finance multifamily housing. That can often come at high cost. Then you have high interest rates as well, just generally. If you can replace some of that equity with public dollars, with a public loan from like a housing finance agency, you can cut the cost by like 6 to 10% to build a multifamily unit and actually finance some of the affordability in it in a way that makes it pencil and actually works. The units get built. Montgomery County in Maryland has done this recently. Zach Marks is an interesting person who's worked on this. There's an Odd Lots podcast if anyone listens. And I think the other piece on high financing costs is it makes delays even more expensive. So it makes the ability to get through the red tape even more essential because delays are more costly. They were always costly, but they're even more costly now.
Very helpful, Governor Murphy.
Jared, can I just because I want to clarify something really
Yes.
quickly? Because I don't know if other states do this, but in Oregon, we changed our constitution to use our public obligation bonding capacity at the state to fund housing, which is why the PABs are so important. And I don't know how many people are doing that, but we've had that for almost a decade now.
I'm not sure I've got a magic wand, Jared. A couple of observations. Most important thing I've heard is I would like Greg Gianforte's legislative calendar in New Jersey. So that's the most important follow-up that I've got.
Phil, Mark Twain said, "No man's life, liberty, or wallet is safe while Congress is in session."
And Phil,
These days we're all safe while Congress is in session because they aren't doing much, but.
It's spoken as a former member.
Phil, I was going to say we've got a little bit better because Greg's got 90 days every 2 years. We've got 80 days every 2 years, but we're trying to get it changed to 2 days every 80 years.
That is for the ages. I'm going to come back to you, Doug, in a second. No, I'm serious, but we're not dissimilar than any of you. We've probably got one of the most expensive. It's not Hawaii. Our median house price is about $550,000, but it's up dramatically, especially post-pandemic, where we had a lot of in-migration from New York City and Philadelphia, especially up north. We have a chronic shortage of affordable housing. We have a very famous, now decades-old case, the Mount Laurel case, which was basically redlining against black and brown potential home buyers that has had a huge impact over the past now 40 years plus in New Jersey. There's a bill that's being debated and pending in the legislature, which may well at long last solve that riddle. Right now it's in the courts, town by town. That may actually get solved this year, which would be a pretty historic step in the right direction. I won't bore you with all the things that we've done. We're building out as aggressively as we can, and we have a huge, Tina, like you, we have a huge shortage. I'm not sure, Dan and I were saying, I'm not sure where that number lands. The advocates probably push it to a bigger number, but it's still a big number no matter where it lands. On the specific question of Spencer's idea, which is why I'm going to come back to Doug, I love it. And my guess is it's going to work. And you've given us food for thought. But Doug, I've been trying to build a public bank in New Jersey since the day I got in office, and North Dakota is the only state in the nation that has it. And it struck me that Spencer's approach is a little bit of a version of that. You don't go to, I know student loans is a big piece of what your public bank does, but I wonder if there's something in here that we could learn from that, but also it's kind of a variation of what you've got in North Dakota, as I understand it at least.
Yeah, well, and happy also to talk, Spencer, about that idea because of our legacy fund, which is built with energy, so think of it like a mini sovereign wealth fund, not as big as Alaska's, but we're building it. In that one, we passed legislation a few years ago where we took 20% of it, which was $1.6 billion, and growing, and that 20%, 10% was designated towards going towards bonds, in-state investment, another 10% towards equity. It was a little aggressive on the equity side for us right away. We've made some modifications, but we've got two tools, the state bank, which is over 100 years old. The student loan portfolio, it's about a $10 billion bank, about 10% of the portfolio is student loans, and the other piece goes towards all kinds of basically economic development activities and supporting our local community banks. So we don't compete with our local community banks, but we probably got the most robust local community banks in the country because we've been able to stop the large nationals from coming in, buying up all the small town banks, then closing the branches. So we've been able to maintain local family ownership, and that's why we've got such a healthy, well-capitalized local banking system.
So that was going to, Jared, if I may, two other quick, that's why my one concern with your plan, Spencer, is whether or not the local community banks are going to see you as crowding them out. The second comment.
So again, all of the local community banks will be participating in this, and that's important, and they'll be matching funds, and they like it because it increases, again, their threshold to be able to lend with the security of the state backing it.
So that's one of the magic wands in the North Dakota bank where they've sort of put the money essentially through the community banks. So there's harmony. The other comment, Jared, is a simple one. I'll be stunned if a year from now interest rates aren't lower. I don't know how much lower, but I'll be very surprised that they're not lower. And God willing, that's a journey that will continue, and that a chunk of this problem will get either solved or get a lot better than it is today.
Fellow governors?
Jared, over
yes.
here.
Yeah, Governor Carney.
Yeah, I just have I'm not sure, I heard it to a limited extent, I think, but are there other states? I know Maryland has an inclusionary zoning requirement in Montgomery County. I'm just worrying if any of the other governors, the other states have inclusionary zoning. So in a kind of high income community with big houses, a requirement that a portion of the development include affordable units. Just wondering if anybody has something.
In Colorado, as an example, we allow our municipalities and counties to require up to 20% homes are capital A affordable at their discretion. They can do 0%, 10%, but up to 20%. Governor Moore?
Yeah, thank you so much. And first, I just want to say thank you to so many of you for answering my calls when I called asking about this exact issue, because this has been a core priority for us, and also folks from the Arnold Ventures. who we've been doing a lot of great work on together dealing with the issue of child poverty. So thank you. And it is true. I mean, so in our state, you do have a lot of local zoning that includes the inclusionary housing. It is not something that it takes place on a statewide level. And that was actually one of the lessons learned that we had, was that how you look at these things from a statewide level, it does become complicated. And so we actually have what is now, we've just introduced maybe the most aggressive and thorough housing package in our legislative session in our state's history that's actually in front of our legislature right now. Because it's looking at how can we do a lot of this movement through incentives and not mandates, because that has been a key thing, I think, being able to get a lot of these local jurisdictions to be bought in. Because also the challenges that we are seeing in Montgomery County and how they can utilize inclusionary housing is going to be different from a Baltimore, where part of their challenge is there's 18,000 vacant homes. If you include brown homes, brown zones, it's around 40,000. So the way they're looking at it is very different than even from the Eastern Shore, where it's about how do you protect the farmlands and the wetlands, but in the places where you can build, that you should be able to build. And so we've really had to take a very targeted and regional approach to it. I think there's three things that we've really focused on. One is how are we talking about increasing the inventory, and we spoke about some of those things, and actually utilize a lot of ideas of apprenticeships and things about how to get more people involved in that work. The second piece is just the basic protection of renters, and that includes legislation that we have on board now, which is giving a right of first refusal for renters, so turning more renters into home buyers, raising the eviction filing fee in Maryland. Maryland right now is the lowest eviction filing fee in the entire country. And the third piece is producing value. And Governor Murphy, you just spoke on it. We're proud of the fact that Maryland is the birthplace of Thurgood Marshall, and it's a birthplace of Babe Ruth. It's also the birthplace of redlining. It is where redlining began, and the idea of using discriminatory lines to be able to determine where people can live and what the values of their home should be. And so we've really tried to take a very aggressive approach to addressing the issue of unfair appraisal values in historically redlined neighborhoods, because those have been one of the greatest drivers of wealth theft that we have seen in our state's history. And so making historic investments in being able to train appraisers, historic investments in being able to come up with fairer values for people inside of homes and neighborhoods, and making sure that we can address the housing issue and the housing crisis without doing something that focuses on or screams either displacement or gentrification or wealth theft. And so it's something we've been very deliberate on, but I think a key lesson learned, going back to how Montgomery County looks at it versus how the Eastern Shore will look at it versus how Western Maryland will look at it, is you have to be just very deliberate and very regional in the way these things are focused to have the kind of progress that we're looking for.
Governor Bergen.
Fantastic discussion. I want to just add one general point in here, because I know Greg's doing this in Montana, but when I hear about us trying to solve the issue, with zoning, we should just, in America, we invented zoning, and zoning came during the Industrial Revolution when there was a lot of like air pollution, other things, say, hey, we're going to have the factories here and the people here, and we got to keep them separate. And then we went even further and said, well, here's the kind of homes that can be, and retail's there. And we just, it was a one-dimensional map, and you draw it out and say, everyone, all these four things have got to be separate. And guess who that was great for? That was great for people that built roads, and it was great for the car companies. And then we built a city that's designed, we built cities all over America that are designed for automobiles and not designed for people. And then if you take a look at your cost, anybody that's been a mayor, like Spencer's been, the cost of running a city is the linear feet of everything. It's the linear feet of sewer and water and sidewalk and roads. And then when you get more of that, you need to have more fire stations. And then you've got school districts that independently decide to build greenfield elementary schools out on the edge, and that's great for the developers. So you drive all this linear cost is the cost of that infrastructure. And Tina mentioned, everybody mentions the cost of this, hey, how do we pay for the sewer and water? Well, sometimes when we're doing that, we're making developers rich, and we're not helping the people, the workforce that we're trying to solve. And so one of the things that is changing in some cities around code is form-based code, which is if you're building one of these neighborhoods, instead of saying, oh, you can do up to 20% in low income, if you have a neighborhood that's all houses, if you want to have a coffee shop that looks like a house, you should be able to have a coffee shop. Because then people say, hey, I leave my starter home, I want to move to a new home, it's got to have 3 cars, 3-car garage. Why does it have a 3-car garage? Because the mom, the dad, and the kids all got a car to be able to drive to school, drive to church, drive to a restaurant, drive to a grocery store. Of course you need all that because you can't walk to anything. And part of, then people will, they'll go on vacation and they'll say, wow, that was the most amazing vacation I ever had. Why? Well, because we went to some place where we could walk and everything was right there. Well, you can actually have that in our own states. You just have to design it. And I think that we've got to make sure that we're not using the success we're having at the state level to subsidize bad design, which then down the road, 10, 20, 30 years from now, when people say, hey, we've got these new forms of transportation because of new things, of new designs of electric bikes, which become, Four Seasons and do whatever. And we've spent all of our dollars building roads and we haven't sent, there's places in Northern Europe that have snow where people bike all winter long. You can't find a place like that in the US because we don't put the investment into building the infrastructure for multimodal transportation. So I think one of the things that we have to look at as a country, our housing costs are high in part because of the way that we've designed our cities. And I think there's, again, this check out form-based code. There's some really interesting things that are there. And you guys talked about at the beginning, the granny flats and other stuff, but part of it is we've got to get the coffee shop, the barber shop, and law firms back into residential neighborhoods in ways that can help lower the cost and create services where you don't need a car for everything.
Very powerful vision, Governor Burgum. Yes.
Put it on.
Go ahead,
Dan McKee from Rhode Island. Thank you, Spencer, for pointing out that home ownership needs to be part of this whole formula. In Rhode Island, we put 25% of our APRA funds towards housing. In my second budget, that was $250 million. We're approaching $500 million for rental, primarily rental, low and moderate income right now. So in a state our size, that's a pretty sizable number. $100 million we're going to have on the ballot this year, and we're really looking at home ownership and creating that workforce or that career path housing. So we'd like to compare notes. I've announced we're going to do it, but I don't know how we're going to do it yet. So I got about 60 days to actually figure out how we make that presentation, but love to kind of get with you on that. I was a former mayor as well, so we put the in-law housing in 20 years ago. Actually, my mom lives in an in-law apartment in a house that we built about 15, 18 years ago. So that works in a way that I think is really important. I think that it was mentioned by the panel up there. And also the issue, I'd like to ask Greg, you said you moved your available apartments from about 1% to 6%. Can you tell us how many units that is? I mean, we're last year on home ownership, I put $30 million in to create the down payments for home ownership. We did about 1,600 new homeowners in the state of Rhode Island as a result of that in 1 year, and still waiting list on that. But how many units did you need to build against how many you had to move it from a 1% to a 6%?
Yeah, so that data came from a study that was done by the realtors in the city of Missoula, which is one. We don't have any big cities. As our former U.S. senator used to say, there's a lot of dirt between the light bulbs. So you could go outside here, just to give you a perspective, you could get in your car outside this building and drive to Chicago. You're still in Montana. That's how big it is. So Missoula is a community of 50,000 people. And if you Google Missoula apartment vacancy rate something, the story was about 60 days ago that reported that. And that was also the report that showed that the rental rates had come down by 20%. So that's one community that had impact from all the things that we did.
Yeah, and that's a key.
Our largest community is about 100,000 people. Billings is number one. Yeah, Missoula is one of our university towns, but
yeah, that's a key piece in that number. To move you from that, that's very impressive. You went 1% to 6% and lowered the rentals by 20% on that. So we'll follow up on that number because one of the concerns I have is actually overloading the market. We've seen that in our state where we drive prices down so far that people start losing a lot of the equity that they built up over a period of time. So there's got to be a sweet spot in there.
Yeah, and we have not seen, we've seen a leveling off of home values. We've seen rental rates come down. We haven't seen actual home prices come down yet.
We are running short on time. We're going to go to Governor Kotek for the final governor remarks, and then back to Charlie. The question I kind of posed to Charlie in a moment will be, what have we not said that we should be talking about? So what else should be in this suite of things that you haven't heard here today? Governor Kotek.
Thank you, Governor Polis. I really enjoyed this conversation. Couple things, more philosophical, I think. The balance between mandates and incentives. Our inclusionary zoning, what happened in Oregon was, prior to me coming into the legislature, this was many years ago, we actually outlawed inclusionary zoning. So when we tried to put it back as an option for communities, we got so much pushback that we had to actually write into law all the criteria you would use, and it made it very rigid. So it was voluntary, but too rigid. So just, I think we all have to be careful. One of the reasons that when it came to the middle housing law in Oregon, people were like, make it voluntary. And I went with cities over a certain size have to do duplexes, where they would normally just do single-family standalones. 25,000 and higher population, you have to include the other types of middle housing. The reason for that was I didn't want to see some communities saying, well, we're not going to change and others changing, because you were going to have a significant equity issue right off the bat. And so, and people got there. They still have local variation, but everybody should be trying to provide different options. And I want to challenge all of us. I love the idea of starter homes, because then people can take advantage of the #1 investment in our country for housing, which is the mortgage interest credit. You own your home, you get a big tax break. But we should have smaller homes that qualify for that. Duplexes as home ownership opportunities, townhomes, because in places where you don't have a lot of land, we got to think differently about it. So many options. I hope you're successful. Ownership really matters. It really does. But what that ownership looks like, I think we have to change.
It's a great idea. And along those lines, we're trying to do accessory dwelling units by right, but a next phase of that would be an automatic way to subdivide and sell. So somebody, not just for rental, we want affordable units for rent, but also what a great starter home if you subdivide. What haven't you heard, Charlie, that you would like to hear or would like us to hear?
Well, I've heard a lot of really great ideas and a lot of great leadership, so thank you. One thing that hasn't come up as much as parking. I think it's just an easy thing to miss, but parking is expensive, especially free parking. And so, Minneapolis, I mentioned, they got a bunch of apartments built, saw rents come down in real terms, even while other cities saw rents continue to rise. And a lot of that was because they built apartments along bus rapid transit lines, and they said, well, a lot of folks are going to be taking the bus. We don't need as many parking spaces. They still had parking spaces, but they just didn't have the minimum number they would have been required to have previously by a parking minimum that didn't make sense for those buildings. So it's just a thing to consider. The only other thing I'll say is, and this relates a little bit to Governor Burgum's point and Governor Moore's point, is there's so much path dependency in what our built environment looks like that people don't think about. And so it seems like people are choosing a certain option when actually they're not being provided choices that they would choose if they were there. And I think you have to reconcile that with the fact that people don't like change in the abstract, right? But then if you build them the community with the coffee shop they can walk to, it doesn't mean they're not gonna have a car. Of course they're gonna have a car, but they'll walk to the coffee shop more and they'll feel good about that like they would on that vacation community, And I think people don't think about the fact that a lot of this stuff we're just living with because it's always been that way. And when you make those changes and provide those options, it's actually quite popular. And so don't mistake the sort of initial brush with reality that Governor Cox was describing and that a lot of you face with how that will play out over the long term. Because I think you see over and over again, when people make progress on this issue, they're rewarded for it, both by a better community and by people who say, thank you. So.
Thank you, Charlie Anderson, for joining us. Thank you to the Arnold Ventures. We appreciate your support, both policy as well as on the nonprofit side, for a lot of this important work. Thank you to our fellow governors. This was a wonderful exchange of ideas on an issue that I think for all of us is our #1, or perhaps a few of you #2 issue, but a big issue for every single one of us. With that, I'll turn it back over to our chair, Governor Cox.
Thank you. A round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost done. I do have to ask one question on this topic, though, because Doug's going to make me do it. It's my favorite question to ask in a crowd like this. How many of you growing up walked to school, the grocery store, or church? One of those three. Raise your hands. Okay. Look around the room at all those hands. How many of you walk to one of those places now? Okay. A little more than I expected, but you see the numbers go down drastically, so I appreciate that. Other thing I have to point out, there was an editorial in the Washington Post just today that is titled, "Build, Baby, Build, Governors Take a Walk on Housing Supply Side," with a beautiful picture of our good friend Wes Moore there, looking very dapper, Wes, I must say. And it's basically a review of all of our State of the State addresses that mentioned housing. And so many of you are mentioned in there if you get a chance to check it out. The last thing I have to say is just this. I hope we recognize how unique what just happened is in politics in our country today. I don't think anybody could, being in the room right now, if they didn't know who we were, would have known who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. I didn't hear one comment.
We would have thought Doug was a Democrat for sure, the way he talked about that vision. I was like, Doug for president, man.
Doug, I guess I have to let you respond. Those were the rules of the debate, so.
I believe in economics.
There you go. I like that. I like that as well. Trust the science, Doug. Listen, I just want to thank all of you for sticking around to let you know how proud I am to be associated with you. The greatest leadership in the country and in the world is in this room right now. We admire you. We appreciate your service and your dedication. I know it's hard on your families. We have a beautiful event tonight scheduled at the White House. I hope all of you get an opportunity to be there. It is a very special occasion, and we look forward to hosting you there. But for now, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.